The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Nangle, and I direct the Adult Division in the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning, and I'm so glad to see so many of you with us for this very exciting event. Tonight is the first of this three-part series that begins with a stellar panel of stars who have been essential to the vitality of the musical theater. Then on November 21st, there will be a discussion of writers who write about people who make our society tick, and we have termed that evening, The Observers Speak. And in January, we turn our attention once again to that never tireless subject of food and present Florence Fabricant, Daniel Young, Anthony Bourdain, and Roseanne Gold comparing the secrets of their trade. In addition to this series, our host is also interviewing some of the most exciting personalities of our time as part of the 92nd Street Y's General Lectures program, such as Wally Lamb, Eric Bogosian, Dr. Joy Brown, and this Thursday, he will be interviewing Gore Vidal as well. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our host, who has been a terrific friend of the 92nd Street Y. He is one of the most listened to radio talk show hosts and is the host of the WNYC talk show, New York and Company, which is the highest rated public radio talk show locally. He has interviewed nearly every major figure in the political, entertainment, and literary worlds and is the interviewer of choice for countless personalities. A true man about town, as well as a Renaissance man for our time, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. Leonard Lopate.
Thank you. We've come a long way since the first musical show in medieval times when 4 monks played out a trope of the Alleluia from the Easter Mass beside the high altar of a European cathedral. Today, most of our shows are meant for entertainment rather than salvation. At least that's the intention. But it's a sure thing that every few years you can expect to see another article in the Sunday New York Times pronouncing the musical theater dead, an art form that has reached the end of its cycle. That hasn't stopped some very talented people from continuing to create them, though, and despite all of the complaints about the popularity of rock and roll and the dominance of Andrew Lloyd Webber, musical theater, supposedly dead as the dodo, continues to thrive and evolve. And here tonight are 3 award-winning artists who are more than a bit responsible for keeping the patient alive, and I'm very pleased to bring them out now. Charles Strouse won his first Tony for Bye Bye Birdie. I think that was 1960. There was another Tony for Applause and a third one for Annie. Also a couple of Emmys for that one. There have been Charlie and Algernon, All-American, Golden Boy, It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, Mayor, Dance a Little Closer, Nick and Nora, and Annie Warbucks, among others. Mr. Strouse has written music for many films, including Bonnie and Clyde and The Night They Raided Minsky's. And if that's not enough, he's also the composer of the theme song for All in the Family, the one that was sung by Archie and Edith at the start of each show. So let's bring out Charles Strouse. Susan Stroman is currently represented on Broadway as the director and choreographer of the revival of The Music Man and as co-creator, director, and choreographer of Contact. Both got Tonys, and her choreography for Crazy for You not only garnered a Tony, but also the Drama Desk and Outer Critics Circle Awards, and an Olivier when it was performed in London and on the West End. I want to get on with this discussion, so just trust me, there have been lots of awards for other shows. She's choreographed here in England, Oklahoma, Showboat, Steel Pier, and Picnic. She's also done works, created works for the New York City Ballet, the Martha Graham Dance Company, the Christmas show at Madison Square Garden, Radio City Music Hall, and much more. And I'm very thrilled that she could join us today, Susan Stroman. And talk about drama desks, Olivier's, New York Drama Critics, and Tony Awards. James Lapine has won a slew of them for Into the Woods and Passion, his collaborations with Stephen Sondheim. They also got a Pulitzer for Sunday in the Park with George. Mr. Lapine has worn many hats in his various other theatrical ventures, working variously as a librettist, a playwright, a director, on falsettos, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, table settings, 12 Dreams, and Luck, Pluck, and Virtue. As a director, he's done, among others, The Diary of Anne Frank, and most recently, Dirty Blonde. There have been movies, too, Impromptu, Life with Mikey, and Earthly Possessions, and a play he wrote, The Moment When, premiered at the Playwrights Horizon earlier this year. Here's James Lapine. There were so many awards and things that you've created that I wasn't sure I got them all right. Did I get them right?
Good.
No. This is a really interesting panel because each of you has had a very different role in creating musicals. It's composer, writer, choreographer, directors, and you've worked on different kinds of musicals. Within the field, are people pigeonholed as specializing in musical comedy type shows or spectacle or serious cutting edge kinds of work? Charles, do people expect you to do Annie and Bye Bye Birdie?
Well, actually, the very first time James and I crossed paths, he was about to direct an opera of mine. So we met on a totally different field. Then after that, we almost worked together when I had a show out of town, but we didn't.
Do people, people seeing you in such different contexts, Susan, do you have a feeling that was that the idea, to confound them?
Well, I think, it's a very good point. A lot of people do get pigeonholed, but for people who create theater or write theater, I think once you have a good story, once you're going after a story, then that story dictates the way you're going to direct it and the way you're going to choreograph it. So in fact, you need to adapt to that style and to the time it takes, the place that it takes, the time it takes place in, and the geographical area. Anything like that can change the way you choreograph or direct. So I think when you're creating something, it's really about the story, and then that will dictate everything else.
Well, James, you're not just a person for the musical theater. You've done probably more things out of the musical theater, haven't you?
Gee, I have no idea.
No, you haven't been counting.
I haven't counted. But I think, to answer your question, we tend to generate our own work. So I don't think you're pigeonholed unless what you specifically like to do is something very specific. But I think the three of us kind of enjoy doing different kinds of work.
So in generating your work, in other words, you start on a project and then you just go with it until it gets produced, and if it doesn't, then you move on to something else?
From somebody or someone wants to collaborate, and other times we have ideas.
For the three of us, it's been mostly not waiting for someone to hire you for a job. It's trying to create something yourself and stir it up yourself.
Does that become easier when you're really well known?
It's never easy.
It's never.
It's never.
No.
You mean people don't just throw money at you?
No.
There's a yes and no to that, because the three of us, I think of ourselves as being serious creators. I, for one, have in the last 20 years been commissioned to do something practically all the time, and I lament the fact that I am, but I like composing so much that I've more or less accepted these commissions. But I would like to, and do take the opportunity when possible, to just do something that has no objective, so to speak, except I felt like doing it.
Well, how does one even get started in musical theater? Susan, did you grow up thinking that you'd be there, or did you think you'd be in ballet or modern dance?
Well, I studied dance and piano and guitar, and I was immersed in music as a child. And my father was and still is a wonderful pianist, so I had music in the house. But I have to say, ever since I was a little girl, I would visualize music, whether it be a standard or a rock and roll song or classical piece. I imagine hordes of people dancing through my head at all times. I still do today. So becoming a choreographer and a director is something I'd always wanted to do.
And did your parents take you to shows?
Yes, they did take me to shows.
Do you remember some that might have inspired
Well, they were
you?
all community, local shows.
Where was that?
In Delaware.
Uh-huh.
But actually, in watching the old MGM musicals on TV and the Fred Astaire films on TV, it was a very important thing in the home to close in on the television set when a musical came on.
Charles, you always want to write musicals?
No, my background was in the classical field, and perhaps I always did and didn't know it. But when I was at music school, we wrote mainly for other composers and for our teachers, and we tried to very much the way I would say dancers probably studied dance. We tended to want to involve ourselves in the discipline of music, to learn classical music, the rules via the classical composers, and then the moderns that we analyzed. It became when I got out of college, I supported myself by playing piano, and I played in so many various places. I played for dance classes, I played in dance bands, I played in strip clubs, I played in, oh yes. I did a lot of vocal coaching. Then since I was an orchestrator, I then started, my first really paying job was as an orchestrator at 20th Century Fox when they had studios here, 20th March of Time, that kind of thing. And then I got so familiar with, I could play, they tried to tell us we're too young in 4 different keys or something, and after a while I started to compose, and the rest is very...
And in those days, of course, pop songs, mostly the standards, came out of the musical theater, so anybody who wanted to write songs might even think about shows.
My first work in the theater was as what we call a choreographic pianist, which was a kind of slavery. And I did that in summer stock, where you just play things over and over again for a choreographer. And from that, I started getting used to audiences reacting to what I did. And I also learned from dancers the meaning of a downbeat. It's interesting what a downbeat can mean to different people, and to a good choreographer, as a good conductor, it has a very pop, it really hits. And if you don't do that for a good choreographer, you gain her or his wrath.
And you have a lot of dancers falling all over themselves.
And that too.
James, did you, I can't imagine you started in musical theater, or
I
did you?
I didn't start in the theater, actually. I didn't really start doing theater till my late 20s. I started in design. I went to art school in graphic design and photography, and just happened into the theater, and then happened into musicals. So.
Well, you're not designing in theater, or did you at some point?
Well, what happened was I did a lot of different things. I had a lot of jobs, and I worked in architecture for 2 years, and I freelanced in graphic design, and one of my freelance jobs was a magazine called Yale Theater, which came out of the Yale School of Drama, and I got offered a full-time job at Yale, so I went up there and sort of was hanging around the drama school, and ended up, it's a long story, but I ended up directing a play up there. And actually I did only my first play, which was at Playwrights Horizons, and Bill Finn, who's a composer, saw it. And
you worked with him in falsettos,
well,
or in all of its
basically
permutations.
Stalked me for a month until I said I would direct his musical. I said, I don't know anything about musicals, but So we did March the Falsettos.
Yeah, then it became Falsetto Land, and then
The sequel was Falsetto Land, right?
Now, I wonder if you've thought about why people love musicals as much as they do. What is it about them that makes them special?
Why me? Okay, well...
Because you're at the end of the table, Charles. It doesn't really matter. I think from now on we don't have to go down the line each time.
No, but you would be able to articulate it.
I don't know whether I can... the tastes in musicals have changed, and I don't know whether they're loved in the same way that they were at one time.
But I think they're more popular today, surprisingly. After all, musicals run so much longer today than they did in the past.
Well, that's a complicated reason for that. It's not merely because they're more popular. It's because tourism has become a different factor. It's because of advertising to a large degree. It is not to say they're not popular, but I don't know whether, I mean, perhaps right now you have two long-running shows. In the days of Gershwin and Cole Porter, the big hits with the most marvelous scores ran for 150 performances, and then they would write another score, and that was the exciting part. Does that mean that the musicals are more popular today? I don't know.
Well, people don't go to Sardi's after the play anymore either. The main conceit of a musical is that at a certain moment, the character has to break out in song, or the two characters have to break out into a duet. When this is something you must all think about, and dance numbers, I'm sure, work pretty much the same way. If it doesn't seem logical, then the audience won't accept it. Isn't that true? Or
I think that's true today. I think an audience today has a more cinematic eye, and any piece of music or any piece of dance has to propel the plot forward. And originally, musicals, you could send a great singer downstage and sing Bill, and it had nothing to do with the show. But you can't do that today. Bill has to be the main character, or she's got to meet Bill in a minute. I think I think just the audience today really, all the dance and the song, it has to be about the character and about the plot. And I don't think an audience will stand for it today.
Well, you're talking about Bill. You directed the play that Bill comes from, Showboat, right? But Showboat is often credited with being the first of the modern musicals because the songs do grow organically out of the story, and because it's a serious story. It's about race, it's about gambling addiction, it's about I can't remember, there were a whole bunch of alcoholism in it, whatever. It really changed the face of musicals, didn't it? Made it something other than a review or some kind of a light comedy.
Showboat always had trouble in that second act, though. And they never quite cracked that second act. And I think they ended up jumping about 27 years just like that without any sign of it. So I think, but the audience just went with it. But in the Showboat that we did here, we had to propel those 27 years forward through dance, through a montage, and show also the contributions that African Americans made to music and dance in that montage, which was not done in the original Showboat. Mm-hmm. So I think theater has changed because an audience's taste has changed also.
In fact, any revival is a rewrite. Annie, Get Your Gun really went through serious changes, but in Music Man, did you have to change it?
Yes, it changed a lot of the scenes, especially in the second act. Shipoopi now is like the 11 o'clock number, but it used to open the second act, so I've changed a lot of that around.
Jane,
and just it has much more dance in it, of course, and it has all new dance arrangements. And
James, in your collaborations with Stephen Sondheim, it seems like the music is such an integral part of the story that we get past that, it's time for a song idea. Was that something that you were working on consciously?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's funny. I don't think you sit we didn't sit down anyway and make any grand plan that way. I mean, Passion, when it was written, was mostly an opera in which we realized there was too much music, so we took some out and put dialogue back in.
Why is it too much music? You think audiences
It got
had a
numbing
problem?
after a while because it wasn't a sung-through show, so then suddenly when people talked, it seemed strange. I mean, the thing about musicals, it's sort of how you write them sort of answers why you like them, which is that they're weird. I mean, you don't think about them being weird when you watch them, but the idea of people breaking into song, it's so liberating. It's I mean, I love it. I mean, I love all of them because I think it just touches us all in some kind of ineffable spiritual way. I think if we all could, we'd walk down Lexington Avenue and break into song, if we were in a good mood, or break into a Kashrai if we were in a bad mood, I mean, it's just...
Well, we all want to dance in the rain like Gene Kelly.
Yeah, I think I think it's also, I don't know why it's an American form. Do you have any sense
Well,
of
I
why?
think the vaudeville that happened, the Second Avenue Theater, the musicians who came over with that wave of Russia, Turkish and Irish immigrants and everything else. I've always thought that that's really the only melting pot in America. That's the place where everyone does get together, is in music. And I think the breaking away from European tradition, which was the only concert tradition, into vaudeville and burlesque, that spirit has become the American spirit, and it's vulgar and brash and colorful, and oddly enough, it's made its way back to some of its very sources.
I mean, now Europeans love these things as American art, but to some degree, we're just sending back what they sent us.
Let's call it jazz. I mean, for whatever it was that syncopation was, and how it grew, and all the things like tap dancing. It grew from American soil, yet Irish folk songs, etc., as everybody knows, contributed to it. But there was a vulgarity that we accepted, and we like. It's very liberating. It's we laugh at our serious sides. I still think that's the part of musicals that's most appealing. It is for me.
Well, there was a time when the musical number would start off something like, the guy would say, Mary, I've been thinking. And meanwhile, you hear the music starting. What have you been thinking, Bill? Well, I've been thinking that falling in love is...
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen anymore either. It does?
It happens in Mamma Mia that's coming this way, actually. They say just that, and then...
Well, everything old is new again, I guess. You can't do that with a dance number. It starts with the downbeat and they got to dance.
Oh no, you can ease into a dance number with underscoring or mood or just chording. That'll get you into the mood before you dance.
Could start with hand clapping or finger snapping.
Yeah.
Sure.
But is it the same with dance? Do you say this would be a good moment to have a dance number?
No, I think you always have to make the dance believable. So you have to believe in the moment that someone would be really dancing for some emotional reason. Mm-hmm. So it has to come out of the moment.
But that's also something that happened later in shows. It was dance all along, but some people say that it was On Your Toes that changed dance because... No, it was Oklahoma because of the Dream Ballet, which furthered the story, and then West Side Story, where the dances were really totally involved in the plot.
Absolutely. Sure, in West Side Story, all the characters danced. But it was certainly the dance had a theme, a fighting theme, and the two opposing forces coming together poetically.
And then with Contact, there are some people who didn't want it to be called a musical, and yet, what would you call it?
Well, the thing is that when I created Contact, I didn't have to be put into a category, so it was very liberating to be in the basement of Lincoln Center just creating. And I think when you make a musical, the elements, the way they balance out, how the singing and the dancing and the storytelling, the dialogue. And, you know, Les Miserables has no dance, but you would not call it a musical. Or Smokey Joe's has no book, where you would not call it a musical, you know. So I think it's just the elements. The plot in Contact is pushed forward through music, and it's pushed forward through dance. So it's just an odd, because it's 3 short stories, because it's what it's about, I think it's an odd duck. And people like to, especially for awards, they like to categorize you. If you're not thinking about that, and if you're only creating the art, then you're going to come up with something brand new or something groundbreaking.
That's part of the fun of
Yeah,
creating.
sure.
Also, part of it is that this is a very collaborative process, maybe even more than other aspects of theater. James, you've worked in both, and you've made movies. Don't you think that the musicals, because you need so many other people involved?
Well, they're very collaborative. I mean, unless you're Meredith Willson, I guess, or somebody who can manage to do many
Write the
things.
book, but he didn't choreograph.
That's true, and he didn't direct it either, I guess. I mean, that's what I like about it, having done plays, particularly directing my own plays. It's a lonely business. It's much more fun to, you know, sit in a room and have 2 minds working on a problem instead of your own.
It's a real miracle that a musical gets up. It just so much collaboration, so many departments, and all the departments dovetailing into one another.
Well, Charles probably, I mean, I don't know how you do it when you've got a book writer, a lyricist, you know, all that one experience I had with you, with all these people sitting around a table. I mean, it's daunting to try and pull all those sensibilities
well,
together.
that one was daunting, yes. I like the process. I truly do. I like giving and taking. I like to feel as though I'm supportive of my collaborator, and I bring the best out of him or her, and I like it very much when they do the same to me. And it's a fun and foolish atmosphere where, if I'm encouraged by the right people, as I have been with Susan, it's a lot of fun. You feel very taken care of. You're in a nice, warm fluid in a way, and everybody says, "Oh, that's wonderful what you did. What would happen if you?" And I just love the atmosphere. Now, I also like I like the give and take sometimes when it's not fun, and I've been in a lot of that, and a lot of good things come out of that, because playwrights very often don't understand that music is the most important part of the
Spoken like a true playwright.
it's wonderful to sit and hear their passion about this scene. This word is key to the whole show, whereas I don't feel that at all. But I have my serious point is I've really learned to listen. A good collaboration makes me listen, and therefore I feel that they're very good influence on me, and I hope, you know, that I'm in some way on them.
Well, does it start with a book usually?
Excuse me?
Does it usually start with somebody writing the book, and then get the composer and the lyricist to write the songs, a choreographer work out the dances somewhere down the line, then the director to hold the whole thing together? Is that how it usually goes?
It varies.
It varies a great deal.
Songs first sometimes, and then
To me, it's very often, I think of it in terms of sculpting a great rock, where you just kind of take that away, and suddenly it suggests a line, a visual line, that is, where you say, that is so beautiful, keep that. I'm a great sketcher when I compose, and that is, I'm constantly altering my music. I have maybe 3 songs in my life that I wrote in one fell swoop. So I find that a microcosm of doing a musical. And yes, in most of the shows, though not all of them, it's been a play first. Bye Bye Birdie, which was the first one I did, Lee Adams and I wrote a great many songs, and it was gradually shaved down, and book writers came and went, and we wrote to those books. And finally, the book that worked, somebody wrote to our songs. It was a totally different idea, but Mike Stewart, a brilliant librettist, loved these 5 songs, and he wrote to those 5 songs, a whole plot, and then we filled it out.
Well, Crazy for You kind of worked like that too, right? There were the songs first and then a
Yes,
play.
well, yes, because Crazy for You, it is a whole new book by Ken Ludwig, and the only thing that it resembles it to Girl Crazy is just that an Easterner goes west, but everything else is brand new. But we had access to all the Gershwin tunes, and some trunk songs too came out of that were brand new to everyone's ear. So it was taking a group of songs, trying to do a story around them, but then, of course, then digging up more songs and finding out what would work, and adapting the story to the lyrics.
I imagine, even though it's collaborative, some people tend to take over. I have no reason to say this, but I'm just guessing that Stephen Sondheim takes over when he's working on a project.
No, you're
No?
wrong, totally.
Good.
Well, he's very collaborative, but first of all, he doesn't write anything till the book is written. So, no, it's funny you say that, because the people I've worked with, I find Steve it's not that he doesn't have strong opinions, but he certainly doesn't necessarily guide the shows. But I would agree with Charles. I mean, I think people go to a musical to hear people sing. They don't go to hear them talk. And to me, as a book writer,
joking,
well, I mean, I think if you're a book writer of a musical, you really are there to serve the music. That's my feeling. I mean, there have been shows in which the books are extremely strong, and but I think that people don't go out talking about the book. They should go
Right,
out
you
talking
want them
about
humming the
score.
song.
Yeah.
They don't go quoting the witticisms. But it is interesting how different collaborations lead to different things. I mean, Rogers is so different with Hart and with Hammerstein. Hammerstein is different with Kern, isn't he? And I know you worked with Alan J. Lerner. I don't know whether you're in any way, anything you did sounded like anything he did with Lowe. Whether you even worked in the same way that he worked with Lowe.
In one way we worked the same, because Alan, we would discuss the idea for a song, and I'd say, okay, I'd like to take a crack, and he would sit on the sofa and wouldn't leave. And he said if I didn't mind, he'd like to stay there while I was composing it. And I thought that was unusual, and he said that he got in that habit with Lowe.
He'd give him the title first, and then Lowe would write the music, and then he'd write the lyrics.
But he would sit there through the whole thing. And he said the reason that was, and he got used to it, and then I got used to it after a while, was because Lowe was was a prodigy, and his mother made him practice and sit there, and he hated it. So he would leave whenever possible. He resisted doing it. So Alan would stay there to keep him nailed into it.
A different aspect of collaboration.
Yeah,
I wish I had somebody to sit there
but
with
I
me.
wasn't like that. I mean, you can't get me away from it. I would just do it. But it was strange to have somebody, I'd say, gee, I'd like to kind of shape that. No, he would like to sit there. He'd read the newspaper perhaps, and then he'd poke his head up and say, oh, I like that part. Can you make that keep going up? And I'd say, yeah, it was it was inhibiting at the beginning, and then I got to love it because he was so giving and so open to ideas.
But that's the only time you went through that. A different lyricist would have given you very different kind of response.
It's always different. I probably have the pleasure of having worked with so many wonderful lyricists, and I think of them all differently. Perhaps one of the most unique to me was Sammy Cahn. I wrote a show with Sammy Cahn, and Sammy was so facile that it's like the beginning of a joke. But he came with a little typewriter, see, and he figured, he said this, if he has to spend an hour with a composer, damn it, he better write a song. So he would come and he would write just the opposite in a sense from Alan. He would write, it seemed to me, to anything, because he wouldn't come before 11. I'm a kind of early riser, but he would get there promptly at 11 with this little typewriter, and I would do what I'm doing now, do this, and then I might go on the piano and go, da-da-da-da-da, and okay, and he'd say, what was that you just played? And I say, what? I didn't, no, you just, oh, I said I was just up, da-da-da-da-da. And this is not an exaggeration. And he would say, why did you leave me? And before you know it, he had coaxed me into that being a good tune. I had no idea whether that was a good tune or not. But he had me, I thought, writing some good tunes because it was very liberating in a funny way. I was not doing my thing.
Right, you're not falling into your patterns.
Not at all. And I wrote a lot of what I think are wonderful songs with Sammy, but he was that way. He just, that's all he wanted to do was write. His facility was, I thought, his weakest part in one way, but also was that spontaneity was very good for me.
Susan, when you're working with dancers, that's a form of collaboration too, isn't it? Now, how much of it is you just telling them, as many choreographers do, to do a certain steps that you've worked out, and how much of it is working with what they are?
It's both, really, because I do a lot of homework, and when I go in, it's pretty choreographed in my head, and I've worked it all out, but then I feed off the talents of the actors and the dancers. And it always, if I make up something that turns to the right, that actor's going to say, you know, I could do that better if I could turn it to the left. Mm-hmm. So then it has a domino effect of falling apart. But ultimately, it needs to look spontaneous on the dancer. At the end, I want it to look like they made it up. So it needs to be comfortable on their bodies. So it's a give and take.
Well, since most of the things you've done are atypical, have you thought about them in those terms?
I actually choreographed my first musical.
Did you choreograph?
Well, March of the Falsettos is very funny. We didn't have a choreographer, and I don't know what. It's just pure stupidity that I thought, you know. It wasn't that I even imagined that I could dance, but we used to. It's a complete opposite of what you're talking about. This was Bill Finn had written a bunch of songs, and that was about it. And those were the days when, you know, there were so many plays being put on at Playwrights Horizons, and you just had an opening date, even though you didn't have a show. And we would just, we would sort of rehearse in the day, and I'd go to Bill, and we'd sort of try and knock out a story around the songs that he had written, and then finish up. And then at night, the orchestrator, Michael Starobin, and I, and the stage managers would get a six-pack of beer, and then we would do all the... I couldn't go in when I first started directing without knowing exactly the staging. And we would do all the movement to the music. It was great fun. It must be great to be a choreographer, is all I could say. And not that we had anything to write home about in that show, but I just think being able to do what you do is kind of thrilling.
Well, when you were working, Charles, with Sammy Davis Jr. in Golden Boy...
With who? Oh, Sammy,
yeah.
Right, yes.
I mean, that had to be a collaboration of sorts, because when you're working with a superstar, you always have to make adjustments, don't you?
Yes. He was such a complicated man, Sammy, that it's hard for me to just say more than yes, or I'll get started. We are, by the way, doing a new adaptation of that next month at Long Wharf, which I think is going to be very exciting. It had its limitations, his superstardom, as well as its tremendous advantages. I mean, we closed after 2.5 years in New York at 100% business, and went to London and did the same thing, and just ran as long as he wanted to stay in it. That's the kind of attraction he was. But on the other hand, there was always that need to somehow get him in one, as we say, near the front of the stage. And it was first directed by a British director, a wonderful man by the name of Peter Coe. And Peter made the mistake of doing interesting pictures on the stage, and there would be Sammy as Golden Boy, his back to the audience way upstage, yearning towards the city or something, and that stopped soon.
Sammy had to be in the front of the stage.
If he was going to yearn, yes. And that became one of the in a very complicated way, one of the problems with the show. Plus the fact that race relations were undergoing vast changes at that time. '64 we opened. Mm-hmm. Today that's not the case, and I'm hoping that the new adaptation will, for my feelings, change.
Have you run into problems like that too, James, where you really did have to change what you had imagined you were going to do simply because you had a star who...
I haven't had that experience. Now, you wrote Golden Boy before Sammy Davis Jr. was involved? Or
it was put together by somebody who said, we were coming off a big hit. Would you want to do Golden Boy if Sammy Davis... Of course. Right. And then he said to Sammy, would you want to do Golden Boy if Clifford Odets wrote the... Oh, of course. So nobody knew that anyone was going to do it, though we were certainly not in that league, but we were coming off a success. Right. So everybody agreed to do it based on everybody else. And but Sammy was...
That's the way most movies are put together.
Yes, it was put together very much by a producer like that. He had a movie background. And also Sammy effectively held all the cards. He had total approvals, which made for a very interesting life because we followed Sammy Davis for 4 years all over the country, playing him songs in nightclubs at 3 in the morning, and that's a long... This is another evening at the...
But I think it's very interesting to people because this show comes on, you see it, and it looks as Susan says, it looks like they're improvising on the stage, and the fact of the matter is long and grueling. And it would have been very different, I think, for Contact if you had had some very famous dancer. You couldn't have done the kind of thing you've done, where everybody is part of this larger ensemble.
But every year, A Christmas Carol at Madison Square Garden, we have a new Scrooge who is a star. And you want to let them feel like they are making up their own blocking, but you are guiding them over here and guiding them over here. But it's a way to approach it to them, to motivate it, and you do have to adapt a little bit. You know, Roger Daltrey playing Scrooge is going to need something different from Tony Randall playing Scrooge. And,
yeah.
You know, so,
well, Roger plays it as Tommy Scrooge.
Yeah. But I think it's just the way that it's a real negotiation sometimes. But I think if you are backed up with your own, research and make sure you have anything they could ask you're ready for, yeah, then it's gonna be all right. Ultimately, they just want to know that you're going to make them great, and they just want to feel comfortable, and they want to feel that they can be free, and that someone's going to catch them, that you could stand in a room and they could jump in your arms, and that you're going to catch them. And that's what they want to feel. So you have to get that up.
You have to have people trusting you. You must have gotten an awful lot of trust because I don't know whether Passion is the first musical that ever had a nude scene, but I don't know how much selling you had to do to work that out. And right at the very beginning of it.
Right. It's always hard doing nude things, but it's fun, I don't know about... I think in anything you do, people have to be naked, even if they have their clothes on, in a sense. You have to get them to be able to do anything, to totally expose themselves. And so I think in a funny kind of way, the hardest thing about that was trying to figure out where to hide the body mic, I think the nudity became secondary. We were all sitting around going, well, what are we going to do about the miking? So,
now, you mentioned earlier that that projects are really things that you generate yourself. So I assume that all of you have some pet projects in the works?
This actually just came from rehearsal. I'm doing a new musical called Thou Shalt Not, and Harry Connick has written the music and the lyrics. And it's based on a novel called Thérèse Raquin.
Mm-hmm.
But the novel takes place in Paris at the turn of the century, but I've put it in New Orleans in 1946, right after the war. So Harry Connick, being from New Orleans, is the perfect composer.
I always wonder about why the things that get chosen as source material for musicals are chosen, like Thérèse Raquin, or, you know, when you look at Pygmalion, it doesn't seem like it would make a very good musical, or Romeo and Juliet, or the movie that inspired Passion. I guess we should have been surprised that the Royal National Theatre attempted to make a musical out of the life of Gene Seberg, or that Kurt Weill and Alan J. Lerner once did a show called Love Story, which was about the development of marriage and the Industrial Revolution. Even the life of Eva Peron, or a cannibalistic barber, or a thing about an artist's struggle using the metaphor of a painting where the subjects come to life. I always wonder why that and why not something else. Do you see things in these stories that the rest of us might not see?
They either sing to you or they don't. I mean, some people would argue some of those aren't good ideas, you know, I mean...
Oh, Gene Seberg was a big mistake.
Well, people
So
would
was the
argue
Kurt
that
Weill.
Passion was a big mistake, too. I mean,
Really? But that was a hit, wasn't it?
Well, I don't think if you ask the investors, I don't know if they would think it's such a hit.
I liked it.
Well, you know, that's it. I mean, to me, you have to love it, and if you love it, then you can only hope other people love it. But I think when you start doing demographic work, when you pick an idea, to me, it would be abhorrent to try and predict what an audience is going to like and then work backwards from that to create something. I think you are who you are, and you try to create something that interests you, and then just hope that other people feel the same way.
Part of the problem is that it's so expensive now, isn't it? It's hard to get projects off the ground because it just costs so much.
It's very, very difficult, because if you make a mistake, you're making a $20,000 mistake on a prop, or it's just, the finances are outrageous now. So you have to go in being quite sure you're going to get it right, or as close to being right as possible.
It's changed so much over just the last 30 years. In 1970, an orchestra seat was $15. By 1980, it was $35, $60, 1990. By those kinds of geometric increments, we're going to be like $200 seats in a very short time. So you better not make a mistake. And maybe that's why shows run so long, because once you've got a hit, you want to squeeze as much out of that initial investment as you can.
I think that's why a lot of people do readings, several readings of a certain project, and workshops to try to get it as close to being right before you ask somebody to invest $10 million into it.
Do you think that Broadway is the problem? I know, James, you have workshopped a number of things before you even thought of putting them on Broadway.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done anything, well, maybe a couple of plays directly to Broadway, but I tend to do smaller shows, you know, I don't do...
You don't have helicopters.
And I think it's kind of sad, you know, I'm sure Charles feels this too. You look at, you know, Steve Sondheim, who can't, you know, fights to get a certain number of pieces of orchestra, you know, instruments in an orchestra. It's particularly, I think, difficult for a composer to want to write a big, ambitious score now, today, with so many people kind of, you know, counting beans. I think it's...
That's why we have synthesizers and all of those
Yeah.
other things to take the place of what used to be 10 or 15 musicians.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, but unfortunately, I don't think Broadway is the answer, and the unfortunate thing is there aren't many venues off Broadway, and I think places like the Public Theater and what few Lincoln Center is doing at institutional theaters we have to offer people a bigger kind of production and find a way to subsidize it.
Well, in the past, even the big ones would have their runs in Boston and Philadelphia and other places where they'd work out the kinks. Now we've had a number of shows that have opened or have done their previews on Broadway, worked it all out there. By the time they opened, they were different plays. Some of the musical numbers were totally gone. The buzz was terrible, and even if they were good by that time, they were sunk, weren't they? That's because of the economics?
I don't think it's totally black and white, but I'd say generally what you say is true. The venues now, to many of us, are the so-called regional theater. It's very hard to think of, I don't know, I don't know enough about which theaters are coming due, but it's hard to think of the Majestic Theater as a goal now. There was a time when one could, but whatever is in the, well, it's Phantom, isn't it? I mean, they're going to stay there for years, and the regional theaters, I have a number of shows in the works, but they're all opening at regional theaters. I'm hopeful they'll be exciting enough that some producer will want to go further. But I do not know the producers right now who want to take a chance on a first-class company that opens in a first-class situation, say Boston or Washington, because it costs an extra $1 million just to move the show. And to open in New York is very dangerous. I've done it a few times. I can't think of the shows that I've done that have been the most successful have opened out of town. That's where I feel I do my best work.
It's funny though, because I don't think out of town is out of town so much
Not
anymore.
anymore.
You know what, with the internet and everybody's online, the minute a show opens in Boston and it's the buzz starts, you can't really get it. You can't. I tried to go to Berlin to get out of town, and we didn't have any success there. I mean, we might as well have just opened it in New York. It'd probably still be running here instead of in Berlin. So.
But some serious playwrights, Edward Albee spent years out of New York. He just decided he'd had enough of this. I know David Rabe told me that as long as Frank Rich was the critic at the Times, he wasn't going to bring a play into New York. And there is that feeling. I don't want to pick on Frank Rich because I think he was a good critic, but the feeling that one critic at the New York Times can be the difference between a hit or a failure of something that's cost $1 million to mount.
Look at Aida. It's a huge hit, and it couldn't have gotten worse reviews. So I think it depends on the show. But Edward Albee, I remember talking to him, many, many years ago, and he would only do a show on Broadway. And now, of course, he left, and then he went off Broadway, and it's like a whole revelation and a whole revival of his career. But
Tall Women was brought here from, I think, Houston.
Right.
There's a curious thing about Broadway. As much as we have a love-hate about it, it has national and international attention in ways that nothing else does, perhaps except the West End, but even that doesn't compare with the attention that's given internationally to a success on Broadway. You figure it out, but that's what it is.
Well, you've all had successes on the West End. Is it the same thing, or is it a totally different experience?
On the West End. I have to ask that.
You won Olivier's. No?
Yeah, but all the shows I did not succeed on the West End. So I mean, they were critically successful, but.
So the British audiences are too stupid for what you do?
Or too smart, depending on who you talk to.
Well, I love London, and I love the West End. It's great. It's just a great place to be. And there's so much theater there, and there's so much fringe theater. And it's so diverse. So I actually love being there and seeing theater. But as far financially, it's not the same.
No, I didn't mean any of those things. I meant I feel the same way. I lived in London for 12 years. What I mean is, you have a show that's a success on Broadway. It's in the Hong Kong newspapers the next day. I've had that, such experiences. The West End is not exactly the same. It's wonderful, but there's something about being on Broadway which commands the attention of the world we feed it in ways that I don't know every set designer in the world, and Buffalo and Albany wants to design sets in New York on Broadway, and it just feeds on itself.
And they review the Broadway shows in many of the newspapers across the country,
Right.
in a way that, I mean, you get like the Guthrie Review and then the New York Review. So there's still a reason to bring plays to Broadway, even with all the problems that it presents. Although these days most of the hits are musicals, aren't they? It's
Yeah, I
the
think
feeling
the-
is that legit
Play
theater is having a real
major-
problem.
Yeah, I think the Broadway play is really what's going to continue to have a tough time.
Now, many people said that musicals were going to go under when rock and roll came along. Charles, were you trying to get past the problems that rock and roll presented by satirizing it in Bye Bye Birdie?
No, we were there before it was there.
Well, it was about Elvis in a way,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that was the first one that made a note of it and actually had rock of sorts in it. But I tell you, it did hurt me in one way, because after Hair opened, it was Clive Barnes who said, from now on, every musical will be a rock and roll musical. And I was sitting on Applause at the time, and I thought, I mean, we weren't being produced yet, but that was to be my next show. And I felt that because of that, I kind of weakened some of the things I might have written. I tried a little bit to get with it. I listened to the score today. You see, that's the problem. But don't ask that question. But I mean, it is a thing that we're manipulated very much by critics' needs.
Well, in the old days, Broadway, for over half a century, Broadway was the musical trendsetter in popular music. Most of the songs on the hit parade came out of Broadway shows, and the pop stars, Frank Sinatra, would see what was a hit in a Broadway show, and he would record it. All of that changed with rock and roll and people who were growing up listening to a very different kind of music. So Broadway's been forced to adjust, hasn't it? To either go to revivals or to do things that get around the rock and roll problem.
Well, Rent is, I think you could argue, a rock and roll musical.
Well, most rock fans say it's kind of a caricature of rock music.
What rock fans? Name three. No.
The woman on my staff who I asked.
Gee, I don't know. I wish there were more young people going to the theater, but as you pointed out, the ticket price is so expensive that you wonder who the audience will be in 10 or 15 years. I mean, I think that's... But, you know, I look at my daughter, who, the teenager, you know, they still put on all the great shows at high school, and she's in her room listening to the scores of this and that and singing along with it. And I think it's kind of great that she wants to go see the revivals, and I think there's still an audience for it.
My niece asked for, she's 6 years old, for her 6th birthday, she wanted the videotape of Pajama Game, so I gave her both the videotape and the original cast album, the CD, because I thought she should hear it done well. And but I thought it was really interesting that that's her favorite of the moment.
Wow.
It's a great musical. So there are kids that are doing that, but a way that some people got around it was to do shows that deal with show business subjects, and like 42nd Street and Chicago, which used vaudeville style numbers, or Chorus Line did it in another way. They were almost like musicals about musicals, going back to the old days with Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney doing a musical. People have to come up with strategies that go beyond. Maybe you don't think though that way. When you're working on something, James, you're not thinking, what are we going to do to make this thing commercially viable?
No, I never
No?
did that. Can't you tell? No. But I mean, you know, I have an office at the Schubert Organization. I mean, we're getting stacks of musicals day after day. I mean, I feel badly for the younger writers who are out there writing them. It's very hard to get a show up. It's just very, very difficult. And I think there is a kind of great crop of young writers composers coming up, and I just hope they'll get a shot at getting their work produced.
Well, one of the big complaints now is the Disneyification of Broadway, and Stephen Sondheim has complained about that. Does that bother you?
It's a little worrisome. I don't know how you feel. Only because that is what I call demographically, although The Lion King is a terrific work of art, and I think they're to be applauded for going to Julie, who
bringing Julie Taymor,
struggling for 25 years to do her work. So, you know, I think it's just. I don't think you can make
What's interesting in a way is your question, because musicals do involve everybody in a way that I don't know why that's so, but I'm delighted it is. It's really of interest. When I go to a party, when I'm invited, so many...
You used to be invited to more.
I used to be invited to more. You've noticed that too. So many people say to me, "What are you doing now?" But I notice they don't say that to people on Wall Street, particularly, and they don't say it to dentists. A very interesting profession, but they don't say that to a dentist. But they, and I suppose I should be complimented. But it's like this evening, isn't it? I mean, you were all interested in how James Lapine writes a musical. I think that's terrific.
Well, all of you, all three of you.
Well,
you're all.
I
And what's so nice?
to James.
What's so nice here is that all of you do different aspects of it. Although two of you are directors, but even then, I'm sure you direct differently. I think I have to bring up Andrew Lloyd Webber. I know he's often picked on more than he should, but I think that his clever solution was to ignore rock altogether. Don't you?
Oh no, he didn't. He doesn't. He's very, very. I know him slightly better than I know you. So that he loves pop and rock, and he listens. He loves it.
Well, Superstar certainly, I think, rock and roll. That's a wonderful score.
Yeah. Well, I read, and I don't know if the story is true, but I read that after he completed writing Memory for Cats, a number of people suggested to him that the song sounded too much like other people's music, and so he played it for his father, and he asked him anxiously, "Does that sound like anything to you?" And his father nodded and said, "Yes, it sounds like about 5 million pounds."
He was right.
So, in the end, if you do something that reaches people, it really doesn't matter whether the critics think it's great or not.
Well, there is that theory that people will come if they like it regardless, yes.
We have received a whole bunch of cards here from the audience, and I'll run through as many of them as I can. This one asks, are book musicals becoming a thing of the past? And then a follow-up is it better to be independent like an indie film or to have the big boys eat my work? I guess this is a person in the business.
Oh, I think book musicals are not a thing of the past.
And the revivals sure indicate that there's a hunger for them.
Yeah, I think what Susan's doing, and I think what you call a musical is just being widened and opened up as a term, but I think people love a story, and they're going to want a story, and I mean, I think Contact has a book. You know, it may not be a traditional book musical, but I think when you stop telling stories, then we're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, the show that I'm working on now, Thou Shalt Not, is definitely a book musical. So I don't think they're disappearing. Maybe because there's so many reviews now. I know there's lots of reviews like Swing and Fosse, which are very popular. But I think people will always want a book. People will always respond to a story, a good story. Creating something like Contact too. It's quite a. I find it a quite personal story. So when I was in the basement of Lincoln Center doing this story that I found very personal, the idea that all of a sudden it was embraced by everybody upstairs at Lincoln Center, and then all of a sudden audiences and critics. It always surprises me when you create something and you go and an audience responds to it. But I think an audience, they really do respond to a story, and actually a story that they can identify themselves in or identify somebody they know in.
Do you want to add to that, or? But it's interesting. It's interesting, Susan. It is true that we have all these review hits, and we've always had them. In fact, when Showboat was being mounted by Flo Ziegfeld, he was worried that it was atypical. He was doing reviews, wasn't he? That's what most musicals were in those days. So nothing really has changed.
No, I think there's different audiences are attracted to different things, and people who really want pure entertainment go to those reviews, and are entertained.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny what you say about things don't change, because they don't change. I mean, it's sort of a cliche, but the theater is the theater, and it's thousands of years old, and you're in a room with live people talking, and I think that's always going to exist. As people are always going to want that, no matter what the advances in technology are.
And Medea is going to be powerful in 200 years from now and 500 years from
somebody will, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Shakespeare.
They'll reinvent it for the time, and hopefully people will be creating new stuff too.
This person asks, if Mamma Mia becomes a big hit on Broadway, by the way, my mother was in that Mamma Mia, that's a spicy meatball commercial, so. She was Mama Magadini in that famous commercial. If Mamma Mia becomes a big hit on Broadway, is this about the meatballs? No. I'm going to sue. Will that be the future of American musicals? Can a Beach Boys musical be far behind? What is Mamma Mia? I don't
It's
know about
a
it.
compilation of ABBA songs. It's very popular in Europe, very popular in London. It's a huge hit, and it is coming here. But it is it's very campy and it's very entertaining. Again, so there is going to be an audience for it, as there is in London. But they do say, "I don't really know you," and then the guy says, "Knowing me, knowing you." And from it, but that's the way the whole evening goes, and people laugh at that, and it works on an entertainment level.
Especially if you know the ABBA songs.
If you know the ABBA song, I think Americans know about 4 ABBA songs,
Yeah.
so I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
They're Swedish, right?
Yeah.
What do you think of the pop rock musicals like Rent and Hedwig and The Angry Inch invoking passionate interest from our youth and gearing more musicals in that direction, since that is the contemporary music of today? Charles? The man who wrote Bye Bye Birdie? You started it all, Charles. It's your fault.
I didn't enjoy Rent that much because I felt that they didn't like me. I sat there and I said, these people don't like me at all. And so I gave it back to them. I didn't like them. Hedwig, on the other hand, I thought was one of the best shows. I really loved that. What's the difference? I don't know. I think one kind of attacked me, and the other didn't.
This one says, for James Lapine, can you tell us what the collaborative process with Stephen Sondheim was like?
No. Well, it's. I think I had mentioned it, just generally Steve likes to have the book written, or mostly written, before he writes. And I mean, each of our collaborations was kind of different. And it's funny what Charles was saying, kind of the opposite of Charles' experience, in that when I first met him, Steve didn't play me a song until it was finished. So I didn't really know what he was working on too much, and since we got to know each other and work together, it's gotten much more kind of like a process.
Oh, well, I would amend what I said. I also write lyrics, and I've been writing my next show next year is I've written words and music, and I wouldn't play that for anybody until I've finished it. It's only when I'm collaborating with somebody that
Right.
that I might be.
So when Stephen Sondheim was collaborating with with Leonard Bernstein on West Side Story. He had to make all sorts of adjustments.
I wasn't there. So.
And he's never talked about it?
No, I've never asked him. I have no idea what.
I spoke about the second question I would have asked him.
Bernstein, however, spoke to me about it several times, and it was Lenny wrote some of the lyrics for that, and it was they became friends, and he decided to give Stephen all the credit for it, but Bernstein wrote quite a few.
What does it mean for the future of musical theater? These are heavy questions, aren't they? When shows that are largely fluff, Footloose, or Full Monty are thriving, while more intelligent and serious shows like Ragtime, Sideshow, etc., cannot, not, I guess, do well. Survive, I think it says, commercially. That's what it says. Well, did Ragtime a flop? It went on for a long time, didn't it?
Yeah, it would have been 2.5 years. I don't know if they made their money back.
Well, it must have been an expensive show, because I think every scene was a new set.
Yes, yes. But that was a wonderful show, and the score was terrific. I think there's an audience for all these shows, though, because the person who will go see Ragtime would not go see Beauty and the Beast, you know. But there is a place and an audience for all these shows on Broadway. I really do think someone will want to go see Contact, and somebody else is going to want to go see Aida.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you don't think the same people go to see them all?
No.
I know when I was. I interviewed a bunch of people at the tickets off booth, and it turned out that every person from out of town wanted to either see Miss Saigon or, you know, I mean, there were 2 or 3 shows you could predict that they wanted to see. They were coming to New York partly to have that experience. And I suspect that they wouldn't even know about Contact. So
I think some of the Disney and the big the corporate theater, this corporate theater, which is like Disney, they're able to get out and reach to the masses. And so people in small towns in Iowa know about their shows, whereas they wouldn't know what was playing at Playwrights Horizons or Lincoln Center.
This one's for Charles. It says, why aren't composers writing melodies? Is it possible to write melodies?
I tell them not to. I don't know.
Do they still come easily? Melodies, memorable melodies?
Do they come easily? Yeah. Melodies? To me, they don't. I don't know about memorable, but I work very hard on making a line that holds interest and surprise and passion and bounciness. I work extremely hard on it, and it's important to me. I think it is music is a vocal art, basically. I sound maybe like I'm being too cerebral about it. It just is the way I am. I sing them, and I believe that it is. It's a vocal art, and it's also a kinetic art. I mean, people dance, they beat drums, and they sing. So that's where I am.
But not every composer wants to write an old-fashioned hit tune. I mean, we have Stephen Sondheim. We have Michael. Is it Michael Lacusa?
Michael John Lacusa, yeah.
Michael John Lacusa, and there are others who are trying to almost hearkening back to. Well, they're going to art song, aren't they?
Mm. Well, I think again the form has changed for different people, and I think there are composers who want to write more traditional songs. And
I don't want to write necessarily, speaking for myself, traditionally, but I do want to write a song that sits well in the human voice, or that you can hear as something that you would be able to sing.
Oh, you've written songs that people. I mean, this audience, I think, probably knows 3 or 4 songs from Annie.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I never thought about it except in a negative way, that when I get up and face a sheet of music, today I'm dealing with a more fractured audience than I ever thought existed, because I'm not a country writer, though I like country music. You know, I just like to, I love composing. That's my, my hang-up. But I've dealt with the question, you know, I mean, everyone asks about, you know, that what do you think of such and such in this school. I think I have enough, I'm modest, but I ain't humble about what I feel. And what I feel musically, I say, well, forgive me, but screw it. If they like it, it'll be great. If they don't, I love to write. I love to compose. So the questions become interesting, but I try not to deal with them. I don't say I succeed, but I try not to.
Ms. Stroman, how much participation do you encourage by your cast in the creation of the backstories of the various characters in Contact, especially the girl in the yellow dress? And this person says, I've seen Contact 5 times. So you're that one.
All of the actors in Contact have a backstory, all of the dancers. So in each short story they do. And for example, in the second short story, which takes place in an Italian restaurant in 1954, there are 2 other tables there, and the one table is a couple that is just engaged that night, and the other table is a couple who have 5 children, have been together. And then, of course, there's our leads that Karen Ziemba plays with Jason Antoon, who are out on, and have a very abusive relationship. So they're able to, the energy of the couple just getting engaged and the couple that's been married for quite some time is an energy that they bounce off of. But all the actors have a backstory, the waiters. And then when we get into the third short story,
But you think of them as actors and not as dancers?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
They're actors who dance?
Yes. Yeah, but when you audition, when I audition people, I want to make sure I'm not interested in someone who can just dance. They have to be able to act. And
that's a big change in recent years, don't you think? There was a time when there were the singers who might have been able to do a little hoofing, they
Yes.
could act okay, get through, then the dancers came on to do their specialty numbers.
But that's when you could afford a cast of 63 or 65. And but now you have to have a cast filled with triple threats, meaning people who can sing and people who can dance and people who can act. They have to do it all. You know?
To James, what's going on with Hunchback?
Well, it's in Berlin, in German, and that seems to be where it's going to stay. I think it's a very large, expensive show, which the people being Disney have decided not to bring to New York. I think there's talk of it being filmed for television, but basically that's about it. There's a wonderful recording of it. I don't know if it's available here. But it has a terrific score, and if you don't mind hearing German, worth listening to.
Well, I spoke to Leon Botstein about that production of the Kurt Weill opera. Do you remember that? The one that was done at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. The original production was done here in New York, and it cost $1 million a week in 1936. And people were complaining in those days that the top price for the ticket was something like $250 or something like that. So it was sold out, and every week it was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that can be a problem, right? I mean, there's a point of no return. I don't mean that. I mean that's an extreme case, but where you can't make back your money.
Well, I mean, you look at The Lion King or Aida. I mean, Aida has reportedly cost over $30 million. So it better
With
be
no
a hit.
superstars.
Yeah, but they did a $12 million production up in Atlanta first, and but you know, they'll make a hit of it because they'll tour it and they'll take it internationally, and their investment will come back not from the New York company as much as probably, you know, sending it around.
I've never done this in my life, but I misunderstood, and I thought your assistant said to me we would go until 9:15.
Well, actually 9:30, which is right now.
Okay, well, I had somebody waiting for me, and
You know, usually
I'm enjoying myself, and
usually I have to put an end to it, but you've taken that responsibility off of my shoulders, and I want to thank all of you for being such wonderful panelists. Charles Strouse, Susan Stroman, James Lapine. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you all, and thanks to all the people here at the Y, and to my producer, Emily Hoffman.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.